The Republican Party is being torn apart from within. Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy is facing a coup from Trump loyalists. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz has filed a rarely used motion to oust the moderate speaker. The radical wing of the party is unhappy McCarthy struck an 11th-hour deal with the Democrats to pass a spending bill that narrowly avoided a government shutdown. Even though funding for Ukraine was dropped from the bill to appease the rebels, Gaetz alleged that the speaker cut a secret deal with Biden to push through the money for Kiev in separate legislation. Since the Republicans control the House by a mere 9-seat majority, the voices of the hardliners hold more sway. But does this loud but small group of Republicans really represent the conservative movement? The era of Trump changed how Americans define conservatism, with one study finding that senators with conservative voting records were viewed as less conservative than their colleagues if they didn't support Donald Trump. So in this new reality, what does it mean to be conservative? Do Republicans have an ideology, or are they now merely opposing Democrats? What's next for the GOP?
All right, gentlemen, let's get to it. What's next for the GOP? As always, we begin with a quick fire round, 30 seconds each to let out your initial stance on the matter, and we pick it up from there. So, Mr. Olson, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Yes, well, I would say that Republicans are a conservative party, and they continue to be. I would say also that 95% of the caucus is united. Actually, it's about 98% are united behind Kevin McCarthy. There really isn't anyone other than that. And I saw in the clip that you mentioned that will he need Democrats? Any lifeline that's extended by Democrats will be tied to a lead anchor. So I would expect that if it requires Democrats, that there'll be concessions. But
all right, Mr. Bryan Leib, your thoughts?
Well, I think what we see unfolding here is what's been happening in Washington, D.C. for decades. And for the inside baseball on that is that, you know, for the Speaker of the House to try and be effective, unfortunately, sometimes they have to make deals that some members of the caucus are not going to appreciate or support. At the end of the day, I think Speaker McCarthy is an America First conservative. I think he's been very strong on a lot of issues. But listen, I understand why Matt's doing this. He's frustrated. I'm frustrated. We keep spending money that we don't have and governing in a really childish behavior. So I understand why Matt's doing this. I don't agree with it, but I understand why he's doing it.
All right, last but not least, Marc Schulman.
Well, the future of the Republican Party, I wore my Titanic tie today because that's the future of the Republican Party at this point. The infighting does not make a party. The lack of ideology, just supporting Trump is not an ideology. Opposing aid to Ukraine is not a Republican conservative ideology. Makes no sense, and there's nothing that unifies them this time except against the Democrats or against woke, or whatever that's supposed to mean. There is no unified Republican policy at the moment, and it's certainly not a conservative party at this moment.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, let's please feel free to interact from this point onward, to engage in a conversation. But before we do just that, let's hear it from the man of the hour himself. I'm not talking McCarthy. Let's take a listen.
Well, he doesn't have my support anymore, and he doesn't have the support of a requisite number of Republicans to continue as the Republican Speaker. Now, he may continue as the House Speaker, and he may continue as a Speaker of the Democrats and some sort of uniparty coalition, but he is not going to be a Speaker in power as a consequence of Republican votes.
So, Brian, what happened here, really? Did McCarthy turn left, or did Gaetz turn right? Or simply put, was McCarthy wrong to team up with them on the budget?
Well, I think, you know, what you have happening here is certainly a personal spat between Gaetz and McCarthy and some of the other Republicans that are aligning behind Gaetz on this. And, you know, I do disagree with what my previous guest had to say, though, about how there is no future of the Republican Party and how we're sinking like the Titanic. That simply is not the case. I'll tell you why we are sinking like the Titanic here in this country is because we have Joe Biden in charge of this country who could care less about doing anything to support the American people. I heard just the other day, this shocked me to no end. Do you know that 12.5% of children in this country are living in poverty? and that's increased over 6% in just 1 year alone under President Biden. So you want to talk about the sinking ship, sir?
You got it joking?
Let's talk about what Joe Biden's doing to the future
the Republicans
of this
forced a
country.
cut in the aid to children. What are you talking nonsense about? Why was it? It was the lowest possible 2 years ago, and the Republicans forced a cut in that aid. So stop it. You know,
Who's
the
the
problem I'm
commander in
talking
chief
about
right now, sir?
Excuse me, but who controlled the budget? Come on, but would you stop everything? I mean, nonsense. Look, I'm not saying the Republican Party is sinking, but they're heading towards an iceberg. Very clearly, their inability to get an agreement with them themselves. I mean, that's the reality. They couldn't come to an agreement. The reason they had to go with the Democrats is the Republicans themselves couldn't agree on a conservative budget plan between themselves. They couldn't get that done. So what's going to happen then? I mean, McCarthy made the only choice he could for the American people.
That was started was the iceberg called a poll. As a pollster, we've been watching a lot of polls recently, and on economic news, on inflation, Biden and the Democrats are polling very poorly. And we started last week with a Washington Post ABC poll that showed the president down 10 points. Now, that's one of the largest margins, but numerous polls have been showing that difference. And ultimately, Democrats are desperate to change the subject, which is partly why we had the push last week that, the government's going to shut down. We averted that. Now, I think the continuing resolution that was proposed Friday was a much more conservative bill, would have been better for border security and other things. But ultimately, the American people are not happy with the process in Washington. And ultimately, there's no one else other than Kevin McCarthy who will likely end up on top. Yet it's a very small minority within the House caucus.
But Dustin Olson, let's stay with on board the Republicanship for another second. Who tilted the gear towards this iceberg? Was it Gates or McCarthy? This is what I'm trying to understand here. Who diverted from party lines?
Well, I'm saying that the iceberg is the bad polling ultimately on the economy and for Biden and the Democrats. So there's a concerted effort right now to try to change the subject. Now, Matt Gaetz and the handful of other people, it is really a 4-person majority at this point because there is retirement in Utah. So it is a very thin majority, which means that any person in their own specific desires and whatever is very incentivized for them, they have the ability to do this. So this is really the consequence of a razor-thin majority.
They could have passed a bill last Friday that was more conservative, that more of the conservatives would have been happy with, but they couldn't come to an agreement among themselves. I mean, how absurd is that? The ruling party in the House of Representatives couldn't come to an agreement among themselves on a budget bill, and so we had the second bill, which was bipartisan, which I'm in favor of, but leave that part aside. It's because of the infighting that the Republican Party is heading towards the Titanic, because they can't decide who they are at this point. And they can't decide between the far MAGA.
There is a lot of infighting within the Democratic Party as well. We recently did a survey in New Hampshire of Republicans and Democrats, and we found that 38% of Democrats would like to replace Biden at the top of the ticket.
That's a different story. But when Pelosi was running the Congress, she didn't have any of these problems, and she had the same slim majority. She knew how to run her caucus, and McCarthy doesn't.
At the core, the two parties have different philosophies. Republicans are much more individualistic, and Democrats are much more collectivist. It just goes to the two parties' ideologies. And Republicans, honestly,
if you look at the history of Congress, that's not the story.
Don't mind working things out like this. And ultimately, throughout the year, we've actually been stronger after each time that we've dealt with these things within the party.
If you look at the history of Congress, it was usually the Democrats that fracture much before the Republicans. The fracturing of the Republican Party is something relatively new, and the lack of control of the Republican Party is something new.
Let me just remind the squad, another vocal hardliner group on the other side of the political aisle. Bryan will stay.
But Pelosi got them under control.
For the time being, at least.
Pelosi did not get them under control. That's not true in any way, shape, or form. When Ilhan Omar had her little spat, spewing her vitriol for the state of Israel, and there was that a resolution that was targeting her. Remember, that resolution went from calling her out to becoming an all lives matter resolution. So Nancy Pelosi did not have them under control. In fact, Nancy Pelosi was scared of them and scared of the radical left, and that's why she was doing what she was doing. Listen, at the end of the day, day, we live in a country right now where whether you're a Democrat or Republican, there is a lot of divide in this country. There's divide between the left, there's divide between the right. And at the end of the day, I see one of my colleagues here is wearing an American flag pin the same way I am wearing an American flag pin. We have to be America first. Yes, political parties matter, a big deal in this country. But at the end of the day, we've got to start standing with our fellow brothers and sisters in this country right now, and we've got to have a love of country before anything else. That's the problem right now. You got people that are more concerned about their political future. What about the future of this country?
And ousting the speaker, that's the way to underline unity, Bryan? I'm genuinely asking.
I'm not saying that's the case. What I'm saying is that our political system is broken in a lot of ways. And Matt Gaetz, like I and many others, are frustrated that our government is governing from continuing resolution.
And for a presidential
money against my future. We're borrowing, we are borrowing money against my future that we don't have right now.
And for a presidential candidate to call for the execution of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that's going to bring country together under the flag.
I don't think anybody actually said that. I think that's taken out of context.
Well, we almost managed to conclude the first part of our discussion without talking about former/hopeful President Trump, and let's achieve that because we do have a couple of more minutes left. And I do want to ask you, Marc Schulman, on principle. Are hardliners engaged? We know it from the parliamentarian system here in Israel. Those small groups that are engaged in political extortion or fair use of the political tools. What are we seeing now on Capitol Hill?
Look, there's something very unique in the American system, which is the primary system, which is that in order to be elected to Congress, first you have to win the primary, whether Democratic or Republican. Yeah. In some parts of the country, the more extreme view makes you win that primary. And so what we're seeing is some extreme people who came to Congress espousing extreme views, and they've kept going. Instead of, the hope was that some people would come to Congress and moderate a little bit and be part of the system, but these people decided not to be part of the system, to maintain their extreme views, and they're using their extreme views to try to get at least publicity. Right. I don't know if they're getting anything done, but they're getting a lot of publicity.
I think publicity is a very good point. Matt Gaetz actually came to Congress as a Jeb Bush supporter in the 2016 election, and this is what happens when you have a very thin majority. Any person's individual incentives will have an impact. And ultimately, that's what I think we're seeing play out here. And I would say anybody, Israelis ultimately actually have a better understanding of this kind of a situation because, in a way, what Republicans have is a coalition government within the House of Representatives.
Yeah, when it comes to political troubles, we might be ahead of you guys at this point in time. And on that note, we're taking a close. We're giving a fight. Okay, gentlemen, stay with us because we're taking a short break. But obviously, we have so much more to unpack right after. So do not go anywhere. A few minutes, and we're back with the summit. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Marc Schulman, Bryan Leib, Dustin Olson. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, of course. But before we get back to our conversations, the times, they are changing, no doubt about that. But will they be changing even further? Let's take a listen to Donald Trump from March this year.
When we started this journey, a journey like there has never been before, there's never been anything like this. We had a Republican Party that was ruled by freaks, neocons, globalists, open border zealots, and fools. But we are never going back to the party of Paul Ryan, Karl Rove, and Jeb Bush.
All right, gentlemen, another quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and we take it from there. Has the era of Trump changed America's or Americans' definition of what it means to be conservative? Bryan Leib, take the lead, please.
I think Donald Trump really reawakened the American spirit that's been dead in a lot of people for a long time now. And he has really championed the America First values that so many Americans truly support and that we are yearning for. And at the end of the day, Donald Trump is at, I think, 60% in the national polling data right now. There's probably another quiet 10 to 15% of people that support him as well. So, he is still the Republican Party's leader, and he's going to be our next president.
Marc Schulman, what do you think?
Changed completely. It's a party that believed in fighting Russia, in supporting allies, in strengthening NATO, a party that believed in balanced budgets, now believed in strong tax breaks without paying for them, a party that believed that immigration was important to the United States, although it should be covered in the right way. A party like that doesn't exist anymore. Today is a populist Republican Party that the party of 20, 30 years ago would not recognize. Ronald Reagan will be turning in his grave listening to Republicans today talk about Ukraine, some of them at least.
Dustin Olson.
Every president impacts their party, and under Reagan, we became peace through strength. We had supply-side economics. Under the Bushes, more interventionism. But under Trump, there was a lot more action and a lot less talk. One great example is moving our embassy to Jerusalem. Many presidents had said they were going to do that. So I think Republicans in general, my colleague was correct, Republicans support them, and that's what we've seen in our polls, that anywhere from 58 to 60% do support him.
And gentlemen, let's once again feel free to engage in a conversation. Bryan, is it at this point in time, to an extent, Trumpism versus Republicanism, or is the first now the latter?
Well, listen, I'm a staunch supporter of President Trump, and I wouldn't say that I am Trumpism. I would say that I very much believe in America First values, and I think that Donald Trump is the vehicle, same way Ronald Reagan was the vehicle.
Please translate that into actual policy. Please translate that into policy. What policies do you exactly support that you think President Trump has done or will do in terms of actual policy? Not saying America First and everything else like that, but what policies do you support? What conservative policies? Do you want to talk
domestic? Do you want to talk foreign policy? What would you like to talk about?
And anything you want to talk about. But what conservative policies do you think President Trump believes in and do you support? Just want to know.
Yeah, sure. How about the fact that President Trump believes that our republic should be governed by states and not by an inflated federal government? That would be one.
What does that mean? Policy. What does that mean? What did he do to make that happen?
States should be governing themselves without help from the federal government. That is policy.
What policy did he implement that did that in any which way?
All right.
There isn't. That's the reality. It's a great slogan. That's what I want to hear about policies.
Republicans, we've done a number of polls on this, and to be clear, while I'm registered Republican, our polling firm is independent. We do not support people on either side. We've worked with people on both sides, actually, but we've tested this with Republicans quite a bit. Overwhelmingly, Republicans are looking to Donald Trump, as well as the other Republican candidates for president, for policies that will help to curb inflation, in particular, getting away from all the new regulations that have happened the last few years, getting back to energy independence. It's amazing that we actually achieved that 4 years ago, and it's amazing how quickly that's changed. And ultimately, from a federal perspective, this is not just Republicans, but Republicans and Democrats are very clear. They do not understand how Washington could so quickly break the border. And you have Democrat mayors in this country, as well as governors, very upset with the situation, and this is what this is actually bringing people together behind what was just a Republican position.
Well, gentlemen, crucial hours ahead of us. Crucial day for Kevin McCarthy and the Republican Party altogether. Mark, I do have to ask, what should Democrats do?
I don't really know. The devil you know is sometimes better than the devil you don't know. So on one hand, maybe better to stay with McCarthy, because when push came to shove, he made the decision for the American people and not for his own good. So I don't know. I guess if I was a Democrat and voting alone, I think I would support him to keep him there. But it's a hard thing to do because they don't really trust him. So, I would vote in favor of him, but I'm not sure what the other Democrats would think.
Bryan, how will it all impact the presidential race? Will it encourage or discourage other Republicans candidates, that is, to take aim at Trump?
Well, let me be respectful of all the Republican
please.
candidates in the race right now and say that there is no Republican primary for president right now. It is over. Donald Trump is the presumptive nominee. He is in the driver's seat. He is reaching out to the American people in ways that the other candidates cannot do so. And even if you shake your head all you want, Mark, at the end of the day, the polling data
it's just sad.
reflects the fact that Donald Trump
I don't
is the
disagree
leader
with you.
of
It's just
Republican Party.
it's just very sad.
All you want.
I'm shaking my head only because I'm sad. I'm sad that the Republicans have this view. I'm sad that they would bring back the worst president in American history, but that's their choice. That's what they want to do. Go right ahead and do it. It's very sad. It's sad for America. It's sad for the world.
American history. I would say Joe Biden is probably the worst president in American history.
And polling actually supports Brian's perspective. The Washington Post ABC poll last week and NBC poll and other polls recently have actually shown that more Americans believe that there's a better background from Trump's presidency than the record of the Biden presidency at this point. So right now, the American people agree with that perspective.
Well, obviously, no polling to back that question at this point in time. But how do you think this saga will affect the presidential race, Dustin?
How this vote today?
Yeah.
Well, I honestly, Republicans have a pretty high tolerance for this sort of like intra-party dealing with our issues. So I honestly think it's not going to have too much of an impact on everything. And what Brian said before, the Republican primary is effectively over. It's mostly the media that's stoking it at this point. But ultimately, everything's moving in that direction.
Brian,
taking back power.
What would you like to see as the outcome of this big day in Washington?
I'd like to see cooler heads prevail. With that said, I think that's probably not reality. At the end of the day, all politics is personal, especially when you're an elected member of Congress itself. It's very, very personal. And I think that's what you really have happening here. Listen, don't forget, it was Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus, who I happen to like quite a bit, who pushed to have this motion to vacate as one of their stipulations. I find it very interesting that a lot of the Freedom Caucus members are not publicly supporting Gaetz's motion to vacate right now. So listen, at the end of the day, I do hope that cooler heads prevail. I hope that Republicans remember that we are Americans first and we need to work together. The real enemy is not ourselves. The real enemy is the other side, and that's who we need to be fighting against right now, not ourselves. No, the problem is saying that
it's an enemy. No one's an enemy. They're fellow Americans. They're fellow citizens of the world. People aren't enemies. Don't use that term.
I would consider any American an enemy who is open, who is supportive of open borders and the drugs that are coming through. If you support that, you're destroying this country.
No one supports the drugs. No one supports the drugs. I mean, don't be ridiculous. There's no.
Maybe some, drug dealers support the drugs.
Yes.
Mark, come on. All right, gentlemen. Thank you. So, and governments, but that's for another debate. Thank you so very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Bryan Leib, Marc Schulman, Dustin Olson. Was a pleasure hearing you guys out. Thank you. Hey, I see you liked it. Want more? Just hit the subscribe button right here. Go on. I know you want to.